When you go to the page which says a few things about font selection and site styles, then I have a list here of things you have to pay attention to when you are picking a font for your logotype. And that is that fonts have personalities. So not all fonts. Some fonts are adaptable, which means you can safely use them for any topic. And the way that you can tell whether a font is adaptable is by asking yourself, does this font remind me of anything? So this could be a geographical location, a period in history, a particular culture, an emotion, a state of being, such as, for example, childhood. And if your answer is no, it doesn't remind me of anything, I just read what it says, then this will be an adaptable font. But if your answer is yes, this reminds me of, for example, a Chinese restaurant or a soccer game or a TV series like the Game of Thrones, then this will be a strong font that you would be smart to stay away from. So the bottom line is, stay away from fancy looking stuff. Really, that's the best way that I can sum it up. And then don't try to be different. That rarely works when you choose fonts. The difference will happen when you put them together with other things. It's a good idea to stay away from cute stuff, unless, of course, what you are doing, the website that you are making, is about cute stuff. If you're making a website about children's games, for example, then a childish looking font for a logotype might be quite okay. So, you know, certain fonts only work in specific contexts, and you need to be aware of that. Now, if you go on the main page and if you go to the this link list over on the left hand side, I have several websites for fonts, and there's one that is a very well known, very old website. It's been around for 20 years probably. It's called Da Font. And nowadays there's a new site which is called Da Font Free, and I have a feeling that these people are actually connected to the original Da Font site, because I can't imagine how they would just be able to take this name and use it without getting into legal trouble. And so I'm going to use this website and the images of the fonts that they have here to actually show you what I mean. Now, when you go to the top here, there's a menu, and actually that menu also used to exist, or still does exist, on the old Da Font website as well. In fact, the one on the old Da Font website is much more detailed if you want to look at that one also. But basically, let's just click on a few things, and like comic, for example, comics. So if you are making a website that is about comics, then using a font like this, or let's see, like this, or this, or this, or this, that would be quite appropriate. However, if you are making a website that is about, let's say, electronics, and you are using a font that is actually called Chocolate Cookies and looks like this, it's a comics font, it's a childish font, it's a childhood font, then you're in trouble. This here, it's a childish font, it's a child font, it's a happy font, a friendly font, and that would not be good for an electronics website. Or it would also not be good, for example, for a bank or a restaurant, unless the restaurant is a place that specifically has kiddie menus and you know, has a children's playground and stuff, and so they are promoting that child stuff, then it would not be good. So let's look at cartoons, for example. So unless your site is about something like Shrek, then this is a font that you stay away from. This is one that you stay away from unless it's about cartoons. Let's see. I mean, you can tell even from this image here that this is something that would be good for childish things, for playful and fun. Pink, it says here, or something like that. This again, it's a childish font, it's a cartoon font. It would not be good for other topics. So if you are doing a website that is about graffiti, then a graffiti font would be very appropriate. However, if your website is about archaeology, let's say, then a graffiti font would not be that appropriate. It would be appropriate for something that has to do with graffiti or things that are related to graffiti, such as, for example, urban life, big cities, inner cities, things like that. Let's look at something else. Let's look at vintage. So, now, vintage fonts relate to a certain period in history, which is usually the mid-20th century or the early 20th century or the late 19th century. They are in fact periods that are known as Art Deco and Art Nouveau. And if you are making a website that is about those periods in history, or like let's say for example you're making a website for a clothing store that is selling vintage clothing, then using a vintage font might be very appropriate. But if you're making a website that is about vegan diet, then a vintage font would not be appropriate. If you're making a website that is about the olden days, about the medieval times, about, like, let's say a TV series that is happening in medieval times, then using a font like this would be very appropriate. However, it would not be appropriate if you are making a website about your holiday in Bodrum, for example. If you are making a website about cowboys, then yes, go for it. But if you're not making a website about cowboys, then this would not be a good font to use. So if you want to get a font from this website, for example, the one that I would click on here is Basic, which will give you the fonts that do not really have strong associations like the ones that I just showed you, although there are exceptions here, so you need to be careful. So for example, this one here is definitely a vintage font. It refers to the mid to early 20th century, but it's already called a vintage font, so you can already tell just by its name that this would probably not be good for you. Let's see, is there anything else here that I would say that you should probably stay away from, that although it is listed under basic, it is not basic? Let's see. So, for example, this font here. Now, I would use this if the website was about something that is a little bit more feminine or classical or something like that. I would not, for example, use this font for a website that is about basketball, for example. But then there are some here that you could use for pretty much any purpose that you want. So for example, this one here, or this one here, or this one here. These are all standard classical adaptable fonts. This here is a very fat font, so I would be careful with that one. But other than that, it doesn't have associations. Now this one here does have associations, and those associations have to do with a period in history called Art Deco. And as a matter of fact, there's a video about Art Deco fonts and how people should be careful about using them on my other website, on my actual website, and I will put a link to that video underneath this video when I upload it, so that you can actually go and take a listen, because that using Art Deco fonts, thinking that they are contemporary fonts that you can use now, today, for any topic whatsoever, is a mistake that a lot of people make. It's an understandable mistake. Most of these here would be things that you would be able to use pretty much. Well, this here again, I would not use this for, let's say, sporting events or things like that, but, well, I wouldn't use it for quite a few things, not just sporting events, but most things that have to do with men, male topics, I would not be using this. Let's see, this here again is a very fat font. I'm not sure, it may cause problems. Again, this is a very, very feminine font, which I would be concerned about using that with more masculine topics. So basically, that's what I wanted to show you. So, like, let's see. So they have something, Christmas fonts. So what are those all about? So, things like this, for example, things like this, handwritten things. Handwritten fonts, script fonts, as we call them. Yes, some of them are very, very nice, and yes, you can use them, especially the ones that look like signatures. But we will probably be dealing with that on an individual basis as you are making your logos. I will probably be directing you and suggesting other stuff if you decide to go with handwritten fonts, because not all of them look very good. Some of them do and some of them don't. Let's see, what else do we have here that I need to show you? Stencil fonts. Yeah, let's just take a look at that. Now, stencil fonts usually have either techno associations or sci-fi associations, and then some of them also have army associations. So this even is called Cold Army, as you can see. But then there are others that are fairly neutral. So for example, this one here looks fairly neutral. They can be very expanded like this. So again, with stencil fonts, unless they really fit your topic, like this here is listed as a stencil font, but it's a fairly neutral font, I would be careful with those. And then there's an area here called Techno, so let's take a quick look at that as well. So again, as you can see, the Techno fonts are usually these very extended fonts, and they usually remind us of sci-fi topics. So this font here, for example, I would probably use this for some things, like for example things that are related to architecture maybe, but I would not, for example, use them for a food website, let's say. Okay, so that was pretty much it for the what kinds of fonts to select for your logo tutorial. Have fun looking, have fun finding a font.